Hey everyone, today we're going to be taking a look at Jon Irenicus, Shattered One. Jon is a 3/3 elf wizard for 2 blue-black that has, at the beginning of your end step, target opponent gains control of one target creature you control. Put 2 1/1 counters on it and tap it. It's goaded for the rest of the game and gains this creature can't be sacrificed. And whenever a creature you own but don't control attacks, you draw a card. Jon is an incredibly powerful commander that allows you to give your opponents creatures that will hurt them much more than it helps them. Utilizing his Goad ability, we make sure that the creatures don't hurt us, all the while hurting our opponents for big damage. Not only that, but he is an extremely powerful draw engine, drawing a card every single time an opponent attacks with one of our goaded creatures. Card advantage is one of the best ways you can find yourself winning in Magic, and Commander guarantees you will have plenty of cards in hand. Something I always want to emphasize is to have the Rule 0 conversation. Rule 0 is when you talk about your deck's power and what it does before a game happens. In certain scenarios like tournaments, this is not as important, but if you're playing a friendly casual game, please don't be that guy who doesn't talk about how his deck works. This deck is not for everyone, as it is a very powerful deck that utilizes creatures to keep your opponents from executing their game plan. It can certainly lead to a bit of saltiness since you are keeping your opponents from playing the game the way they want to. It may be worth asking your pod if they are okay with this type of deck before you build it, as it leans to be more of a competitive level of casual. Ramp is one of the most important parts of EDH. Our commander costs 4, and I wanted to make sure we could get him out on turn 3 at the latest, so I included plenty of ramp to get him out as fast as possible. Let's take a look at the ramp cards in our deck. First up we have Sol Ring. If you've played Magic any amount of time, odds are you've ran into this card. While it may look simple enough, this is actually one of the most powerful cards in Magic, so I want to make sure to include it in nearly every deck it makes sense to. Next we have Arcane Signet. Arcane Signet is an artifact for 2 colorless that allows us to tap for 1 in any color of our commander's identity. Then we have Charcoal/Sky Diamond, artifacts that cost 2 colorless and come in tapped, but then we can tap it for 1 black or 1 blue. Next up is Commander Sphere, another EDH staple. Commander Sphere is an artifact for 3 colorless that allows us to tap for 1 in any color of our color identity, or sacrifice it to draw a card. Make sure you never underestimate the power of drawing an extra card. It can be a very strong ability, and that's why these next few cards also allow you to draw cards. Up next we have Dimir Cluestone. For 3 colorless we can tap to add blue or black, or pay blue-black, sack it, and similarly draw a card. Then we have Mind Stone, an artifact for 2 colorless that lets us add 1 colorless, or if we pay 1 we can sack it and draw a card. Up next is Dimir Signet, which for 2 colorless we can pay 1 and tap it to add blue-black. Then we've got Talisman of Dominance, an artifact for 2 colorless that allows us to tap for 1 colorless or tap for blue-black and tick us for 1 damage. And finally comes Wayfarer's Bauble, an artifact for 1 colorless that then allows us to pay 2 and sack it and put a tapped land of our choice on the battlefield. Now let's move on to our game plan. We need to play as many creatures with negative effects as possible, without being hurt by the negative effects ourselves. This means the longest these creatures can remain on the battlefield is until our end step on the round we play them, since on our end step we can get rid of them with Jon's ability. Relying on Jon to not be taken out just by pure luck is not the most reliable, so I've included what I call enablers to keep Jon safe and keep our creatures from hurting us. First up we have Crawl Space. Crawl Space is an artifact for 3 colorless that allows 2 creatures to attack us during combat. This is especially important in this deck as we are most likely going to be targeted for giving our opponents negative effects. Thankfully, as long as there is another opponent, we can't be hit by our own creatures, but this should help us from getting too hurt from any other creatures our opponents have out. Next we have Dissipation Field, which for 2 colorless and 1 blue, we return cards to their owner's hand when we take damage. This is yet another Pillow Fort effect card that will keep people from swinging at us. Our final Pillow Fort card is perhaps our most strong. Propaganda is an enchantment for 2 colorless and 1 blue that says, creatures can't attack you unless their controller pays 2 for each creature that's attacking you. With these 3 effects, hopefully the amount of creatures swung out at us is kept at a minimum. Now let's talk about how we keep Jon on the battlefield. First up is Elgaud's Shieldmate. Elgaud is a 2/3 for 3 and a blue that has Soul Bond. When Elgaud's Shieldmate is bonded to another creature, ideally our commander, they both have hexproof. Then we have Giant's Amulet. Giant's Amulet is an equipment that costs 1 blue, and when we equip it for 2, it also gives our commander hexproof when he's untapped. We hopefully won't be needing to swing with Jon, so this is a very cheap option to keep him protected. Mirror Shield is another equipment, gives our creature resistance to death touch and hexproof as well. We really don't want to get caught without our commander when we have one of our negative creatures on the board. Next up, we have Puka's Mischief. For 3 and a blue, we get an enchantment that allows us to swap permanents with another player with an equal or lesser mana cost. This will potentially allow us to swap 2 creatures per turn and get rid of opponents' non-goaded creatures by controlling them for ourselves. Next is Strionic Resonator, which for 2 mana we can pay 2 and copy Jon's triggered ability, meaning we can transfer yet another creature per turn. Then we have Swiftfoot Boots, an equipment for 2 that allows us to pay 1, equip it, and get Hexproof and Haste on our commander. We really only want this for Hexproof though, as we don't want to swing with Jon. Okay, I know I'm going to butcher this name, but just forgive me. We have Telgillid Stylus. This card is an artifact that costs 1 and allows us to tap it to put a permanent on the bottom of our library. This card is really a safeguard in case our commander gets removed while we have a creature out that would hurt us. Then we have Parasitic Impetus, an enchantment for 2 and a black that gives +2/2 and goads. This also gives us life gain and hurts the owner of the creature. First up is Bloodthirsty Blade. This is an equipment that costs 2, and then when equipped for 1, the equipped creature gets +2/0 and it's goaded. We want to make sure we use this on opponents that have big creatures that can still hit us. Next is Mave, Insidious Singer. Mave is a 3/4 for 2 and 2 blue that allows us to pay 2 and a blue at instant speed to goad target creature and draw a card when it attacks if we goaded them the same turn. Next is one of my favorite cards in this deck, Mocking Doppelganger. For 3 and a blue, we get a 0/0 that becomes a target of another creature, and the other creature becomes goaded. Again, we want to make sure we use this on any creature that's big and can still hit us. Then we have Parasitic Impetus, an enchantment for 2 and a black that gives +2/2 and goads. This also gives us life gain and hurts the owner of the creature. Next, we have the blue version of Parasitic Impetus, Psychic Impetus. For 2 and a blue, we get the same effect, but instead of life gain/drain, we get the Scry. And last but not least is Sly Instigator. For 3 and a blue, we get a 2/4 that we can then pay 1 blue and tap to goad a creature and make it unblockable. Now we'll get into the fun stuff. Let's take a look at the cards that make our opponents sacrifice their own creatures. First is Abhorrent Overlord. This is an expensive card as it'll cost us 5 and 2 black, but we get a 6/6 flyer, which will be devastating to our opponents. To make things better, this card also brings in 1/1 tokens equal to our devotion to black. We get to keep the flyers, and then his second ability forces our opponent to sacrifice a creature on each of their upkeeps. This is a devastating effect, especially since our creatures we give cannot be sacrificed. Then we have Demonic Taskmaster. For 2 and a black, we get a 4/3 flyer that is yet another sacrifice on the beginning of upkeep. Here we have Desecration Elemental. This card is absolutely devastating to have goaded, as for the low cost of 3 and a black, we get a creature with fear that is a whopping 8/8. In addition to this, they must sacrifice a creature every single time someone plays a spell. Drinker of Sorrow is a 5/3 that costs 2 and a black that can't be used as a blocker, but whenever it deals combat damage, you have to sacrifice a permanent. Again, another creature that opponents can't sacrifice, but will have them sacrificing each combat. Next is Greater Harvester. For 2 and 3 black, we have another card causing to sacrifice creatures during an upkeep. However, this one also forces another player to sacrifice permanents, and thanks to Jon, this creature can't be sacrificed. The sacrificed creatures won't be the ones that we gave. Liege of the Pit is a pricey 5 and 3 black, equivalent to 8 mana. However, for that steep cost, we get a 7/7 flyer with trample that does 7 damage to you if you can't sacrifice a creature. Painracker Oni is yet another sat card that for 3 and 2 black, we get a 5/4 with fear, and at the beginning of an upkeep, you must sacrifice a card if you don't control an ogre. As long as our opponents aren't running ogres, this is another extremely powerful card. Plague Reaver is one of the most devastating cards on this list. For 2 and a black, you get a 6/5 that forces opponents to sacrifice each other creature you control. We can actually completely ignore his second text as it's invalidated by Jon's ability. Plaguecrafter is a 3/2 for 2 and a black that makes everyone sacrifice a creature when it enters the battlefield. This also makes you sacrifice a creature, so be wary with this one, as it can cause you to sack your commander. If you have an extra creature out though, it helps ensure that you aren't being hit by other people's creatures. Rust Elemental is a 4/4 for 4 with flying that either makes you sacrifice artifacts or take 4 damage. Finally, we have Shadowborn Demon, who is a 5/6 for 3 and 2 black. When he enters the battlefield, you pick a non-demon to destroy, and then we want to make sure that we give this to someone who has little to no cards in their graveyard, or runs a deck with low amount of creatures, because as long as there are fewer than 6 creatures in your graveyard, they must sacrifice on their upkeep. Not all the cards that we want to give necessarily need to be sacrifice cards, so this next session is what I like to call Socks, the gift that you get but you really wish you hadn't. Socks are cards that give very negative effects but don't require sacrifice. Our first Sock is Abyssal Persecutor. For 2 and 2 black, we get a 6/6 with flying and trample. That's already pretty nasty, but what makes it even better is that you can't win and your opponents can't lose. Now obviously if we were keeping that card it would kind of suck, but since we can't win. But to give it to an opponent, suddenly you can hit 0 life and still be in the ring. Archfiend of the Dross is a 6/6 for 2 and 2 black that has flying. The kicker here is that it enters with 4 oil counters. You remove 1 each round, and when hits 0, you actually lose the game. You have to be careful with this one, because you can give it away to someone who scoops or loses before it hits 0, it goes back to you. Alternatively, you can hold on to it until it's 1 oil counter, and then give it away. Evil Eye of Orm's Bygor is a very goofy card. For 4 and a black, we get a 3/6, but the text reads, non-eye creatures you control can't attack, and it can be blocked by walls. Now, I don't know about you, but I've never seen an eye deck before, so as long as you don't give it to someone with a deck running eyes, this card is a spectacular way to shut down opponents. So, remember what I said about never seeing an eye deck? Well, I guess this could be considered one as we get to eye number 2. Evil Eye of Urborg is a 6/3 for 4 and a black that similarly says non-eye creatures you control can't attack. But this one, whenever it's blocked, the creature is destroyed. This will likely be hitting opponents for 6 damage as they won't want to sacrifice their creatures. Next is one of my favorites. Flesh Reaver is a 4/4 for 1 and a black that says whenever Flesh Reaver deals damage to a creature or opponent, it deals that much damage to you. Maybe not the most powerful card to give away, but it is certainly a fun one. Phyrexian Soulgorger is a whopping 8/8 for only 3 colorless, that has a cumulative upkeep of sacrificing a creature. Normally, that's pretty devastating for us, but for us now, it doesn't matter. If an opponent gets this and decides not to pay its upkeep cost, nothing happens. It can't be sacrificed, so we have a big 8/8 swinging at our opponents for only 3 mana. Priest of the Bloodrite is a 2/2 for 3 and 2 black that creates a 5/5 black flying creature. This creature is one we will probably keep for ourselves, but as the original card causes us to lose 2 life, we'll give that one away. Rite of Belzenlock is a weird, albeit fun card. It's a saga, meaning it takes 3 rounds to come online, but once it does, we get a 6/6 flying trampled demon that causes you to either sacrifice or lose 6 life. Steel Golem is a very, very mean card, and I even contemplated if I wanted to put it in this deck at all. For only 3 mana, we can give it to an opponent who will no longer be able to play creatures. Ouch. Thought Eater is another nasty card that for 1 and a blue, we get a 2/2 that reduces our hand size by 3. Make sure you don't give this to a player with no max hand size, though. And our final card on the list is Wretched Anurid, which for 1 and a black, we get a 3/3 that says whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you lose 1 life. That completes our deck list. There are many more cards I didn't go over because they were pretty self-explanatory. Things such as lands, removal, board wipes, etc. I wanted to get the most important cards to you, and the rest of you will be able to figure out when you play the deck yourself. I hope all of you enjoyed the video. I put a lot of my own time into making this, so I really appreciate you watching it until this point. If you end up building the deck, please let me know how it went. Regardless of what you do, I always appreciate constructive criticism, so please leave a comment on how I can improve moving forward. Stay cool, y'all. Till next time.